insisted on these cuts finally realized that they actually apply to them too.
And the Brain Trust is here on a Saturday. Angela Rye, former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus and director of Impact Strategies. Perry Bacon, Jr., political editor for The Griot, also an MSNBC contributor. And Robert Costa, Washington editor for the National Review. All of them here, all of them looking for a ticket to the after party. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the Brain Trust. Maybe we can hook the Brain Trustee up with a ticket. So again, for folks who may not tune in every week, this is where we talk for a few minutes, and at the end of our conversation, we crown someone the biggest brain, and they then in turn get 60 seconds to ramble on and rant about whatever they so choose. Let's start with the sequester stuff, because I was stuck on a tarmac at LaGuardia yesterday. Plane was delayed 30 to 45 minutes. Pilot gets on the intercom and has the audacity to say, we are 26th in line for departure. So, 26th. Like he got, so, but here's the thing. Isn't it amazing how fast Congress can move to enact some legislation when certain folks seem to be involved?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a 2/3 vote required. You get more than a 2/3 vote on the sequester from the House side just yesterday. And yes, there's no better interest than self-interest, but there are a lot of other frustrated Americans besides the 535 people on the Great Hill, including you, it sounds like.
But, you know what, but I sat there and I said, I was like, this is bad. But, I mean, I generally can at least acknowledge when it might be bad, but not as bad as some other folks are feeling it. But what does this tell us? What does this tell us about our system? I mean, it really, I was struck, not the fact that it happened, because I think we all knew that, people who are frustrated flyers tend to scream loudly, but the speed at which it happened.
I wasn't surprised. The speed was unusual. It tells you one thing, which is that low-income Americans and federal workers are most of the people who are suffering from the sequester. And Congress just not that engaged with them. But people who have a lot of money to fly, or people who are flying, people like members of Congress themselves, the members care, people who call on the phone, they care about, the donors care, and there you have a quick solution to something versus if you're concerned about Head Start funding. Not so much.
Robert Costa, we've got this New York Times editorial that I came across this morning. I'm going to share it. I'm certain that you read it, but for folks at home who may not have read it, a single senator or a single president could have put principle before a little political pain and said no, but that would require courage. Courage. Which, like government responsibility, is now in short supply. How jaded have folks become about the government's ability to do the right thing, Robert Costa?
I think a lot of people are unhappy, both on the right and the left, but especially on the left, because the president and Democrats have been pushing for so long that if there was going to be a sequester replacement, it would need to include revenue and taxes and it would be part of a grand bargain. And the White House, to cede that ground with this current deal that just got rushed through Congress, means that the sequester is going to stumble to get full replacement. As Perry mentioned, a lot of these groups that had a lot of cuts are now struggling to find replacements for those cuts. Yet why do the air traffic controllers seem to get what they want?
We should note that no Senate Democrat voted against it. I mean, this was a rare bipartisan triumph in Washington, D.C.
But I think that what you've heard from the Democrats is that, sure, this is this Band-Aid on this one potential or one cut here, and we've solved this one cut, but we're trying to solve sequester in mass.
But why not say? Why not use this as an opportunity to say, no, this is going to be one of those rare instances where everyone suffers?
Because I don't think that the original deal was never supposed to happen this way. We talk often about how the president has this great view of people, that they're human beings first, and I can rationalize with them and I can negotiate with them. This backfired. This went the exact opposite direction. We couldn't afford the sequester to begin with because there are working families relying on this money. I have a PE teacher that's an FAA worker that emailed me about being furloughed. So this is touching real people, and while we're kind of making light of this situation that everybody flies, this is really going to hurt a lot of families. They couldn't afford to lose that one payday.
We should know, Craig, this probably would not be the last carve-out. Senators are already talking about military hospitals, for instance, the civilians. They're another thing you can't oppose. Military hospitals have big support as well. I think you'll see other small little carve-outs of things that both Republicans and Democrats don't want to cut. So this is not the last thing. here.
Is this a ploy that we think by the White House to bring pressure to bear on Republicans in Congress to end the sequester?
I think the White House would love to have a sequester replacement, but the secret on Capitol Hill is that Republicans aren't especially eager to replace the sequester.
Right.
In fact, when they go home to their districts and their states, they're cheered for the spending cuts, and they don't think that the sequester has very much hurt the economy. So you're not going to see Republicans scrambling, at least, to try to replace everything.
But perhaps it hasn't hurt the economy on a macro level, but on a micro level, for these PE teachers, what do they say to those folks?
Well, they say that government is getting too big, and that if you have to be forced to cut with the sequester, at least it's better than not having any cuts at all. I mean, most Republicans will be the first to admit the sequester is a messy cut, but they like that it's a cut because they don't think Washington's cutting enough.
This whole ploy notion, though, we cut $85 billion of funding. Something you cared about was going to be affected. Every time there's a cut, the Republicans say, well, he could have changed the money over here or over there.
Right.
Something had to have some impact on someone. The government is not full of $80 billion just to waste all the time.
What was also striking to me about this particular cut as well was, I guess at some point early in the week, or late the week before, someone was like, oh, I don't think we're going to have enough money to pay all of the air traffic controllers. We're going to have flight delays. Was this not something that folks were banking on?
Ray LaHood talked about it in February in great detail. This was not a surprise. The members of Congress were surprised only if they were not listening.
Why were they pretending to be surprised?
It becomes a surprise when people feel it, right? I think the sequester, absolutely, but that's part of feeling it, right? They've actually sat through what sequester feels like. I know now that my flight is going to be delayed. I know now that this local HIV/AIDS prevention program in my community is going to be cut.
But what does it say about us as people that this was the straw that broke the camel's back? I can't believe I've been on this runway for 45.
That's the beginning.
People think Congress is just fighting all the time, and they can't tell what matters to them and what doesn't. And we at times cover it like it's a big argument about stuff that doesn't matter. And now they finally can see here it actually does matter.
I think there is something to be said that the flight traffic controllers were playing some politics on their own here, trying to push for their funding, that they didn't want the cuts that everyone else was going through. And so I think they were manipulating the process a little bit, pushing to have this cut replaced.
Let's take a quick break. It's so good to have you guys in the flesh, too. This is nice. Fearing a backlash, Boston's Muslim community has denounced and distanced itself from the suspects in the marathon bombing. But is it enough to avoid the blame game? Our Brain Trust is back with some thoughts on that. This is MSNBC, the place for politics.